Chapter 10. The Tunnel. I collapsed onto the ground, knackered and bloodied. My tears plummeted onto the drenched grime below as I pounded my fist into the floor. He didn't have to do that. He didn't. Gregory. What was he thinking? I panted, tugging at the bottom of his trousers to get his attention. Walt, look, said Gregory as he kicked his leg from my grasp. It is beautiful, he bellowed, as he frolicked straight past me and into the void. As my neck rose to the sight in front of me, just as quickly it came crashing down like a house of cards, shriveling into depletion while my head swirled in a daze. Questions soaring through me, and yet none were clear. It was like waking from a dream, just pulling at loose memories and capturing nothing more than ash, fading thoughts that escaped within seconds, out from my hand and into the oblivion's wind. My face had kissed the earth's carpet of putridity as I flattened my head against its foam, seeping deeper into its pillow while it scraped away at my ounces of breath, diffusing into its comfort. I felt like I was surrendered under an endless pool of water, my eyes closed, lungs shut, and mind emptying. Floating below the surface, oh, that dreadful surface. If only I could have stayed below for eternity. If only I could have evaded another breath from reality's toxic air. For the longer you depart beneath its cloak, the worse you feel than the second you leave it. Alas, my body had betrayed me. It needed to breathe, and by doing so, it suffocated me. We shouldn't be alive right now. I should be dead, strapped to my seat like all the others. I should have died screaming. I shouldn't be here. I'm not here. I don't know where I am. I don't know who you are. I should know you by now. I should listen to Darwin. I should... Suddenly I fell mute, crumbling deeper into the floor, my nonsensical muttering a clear sign of my departure. It was like my brainstem had snapped in half with a pair of old scissors, rendering me a thoughtless vegetable. You should look up, replied Gregory as he pulled me to my feet, elevating me from my tantrum and smacking me back into cognizance, revealing the next sight in our island's house of horrors. Standing mere feet away from the two of us was an enormous, infernal, entangled nest. Skillfully woven and crafted, its walls stretched yards high with planks of timber, its crown seething with an army of thorns, perched violently in the air, begging for any mountaineer to hop on board and taste its satanic sting. Marvelous, isn't it? Said Gregory as he pulled at the base of the nest, prying a few lengthy sticks from its base. Marvelous isn't the word I would use for it, I replied, as I analyzed the entire fortress. Streaks of burgundy sprayed along the edges of the wood, coating the sculpture in a decadent shade of red. Along with its doorstep, the entire entrance festered with sporadic pieces of cartilage and scattered remains. We were greeted with bones that mirrored a set I'd encountered in the past, almost identical to the skeletons I discovered at the base of the falls. And the longer we stared at them, the longer I feared my own would join their collection. I think we should leave, I exclaimed, growing progressively distraught as every second dripped by. Gregory had answered my troubles with a hearty chuckle, ignoring me while his fingers danced along the sea of lumber. Do I look like I'm telling you a joke? We need to leave. We can't keep risking our lives like this, I hissed. The man's foolhardy ignorance was infuriating to my inner core, and yet there he stood, polluting the surrounding air with laughs. For somebody like myself, who was the proverbial equivalent of an ignited fuse, dealing with Gregory's propensity to spew gasoline in the air was especially dangerous. The only tragedy here is your lack of adventure. Care for another climb, friend? He asked, as his arms reached up and towards the first level of woven branches. I never had a sense of adventure to begin with, hence my displeasure with this entire situation, I sneered. Despite my unadulterated disdain, my companion ceased to even blink, meandering his way towards the top of the cabin with great haste, and pausing right before the dagger-clad brim had a chance to bite. "Are you sure you don't want to join me?" he asked, unperturbed by the wear and tear of his next ascension. A second wind that, by all grounds of logic, should not have been possible. "Yeah, it's an easy pass. Go ahead, dummy," I replied. In an instant, Gregory ripped off the thorns and started throwing them on the ground next to me, some of which came close to falling on my head, so you have a nice idea of just how careful the behemoth was. Once enough of the barbed wire flung from the brim, Gregory drew himself a deep, hearty breath. "Wish me luck," he gushed, and then heaved himself into the jaws of the nest. "Fuck," I yelped, as the hasty decision took me by surprise, thinking the wild man's legs would be snapped in two the second he made an impact. Alas, I was wrong. The only snapping was a fracturing of sticks as Gregory scuttled around the base. "What do you see?" I asked as the crackling grew louder and louder. Again, no voice answered my call. Images flashed in my head of Gregory being gobbled up root and stem. He was trespassing after all, and I doubted the hapless Cretan who called that fortress home was even in the slightest bit welcoming. In a rare spark of gallantry, I grabbed the branches below with my charred and worn hands, thinking I'd save the damsel before he had the chance to save himself. Unsurprisingly, my plan had failed, as Gregory's bright, glowing mug greeted me from above. "Oh, you won't believe this. Walter, close your eyes," crowed Gregory, his voice bedecked with a childish flair often reserved for a kid show. Far too tired to argue, I scuttled a few steps back and shut my eyes. Sounds of feet hitting the floor was the only thing that pierced my brain as anticipation boiled over me. In truth, I was expecting a heaping pile of dust, or maybe a few maggots to calm my stomach. Boy, was I wrong. "Okay, open," he triumphantly ordered. Alas, sitting cupped in between Gregory's hands was a sight I struggled to believe. Perfectly round with specks of blue dotted onto its cream-colored sphere was a colossal-sized egg. "Hungry?" asked Gregory as he planted the mammoth on the ground. Is that even a question? I responded as I knelt down beside it. My fingers tickled against the sparkling shell, beguiling myself with the hope for some scrambled eggs. "We split it evenly. I don't want tension between us. During times of starvation, food is more valuable than gold. I don't want something so petty to get between our friendship, Walter. This is... Get on with it. I don't give a shit. Open it," I exclaimed as my mouth watered in expectation. Gregory then picked up a jagged stone off the floor and lined up his shot. As his arm rose, the ground below us rumbled, delicately teetering, while the bulbous ball beneath moved. The rock from Gregory's hand fell, as the egg's first crack developed. It looked like a lightning bolt had struck along its pale white canvas, a minor blip that festered and catalyzed another round of strikes. I backed up in a panic, while Gregory inched nearer, entranced while the top of the shell splintered. Out from the anomaly's crown appeared a somber, shadowed face. Chirps filled the air as the wondrous creature's eyes opened for the first time. Two bulging orange lamps that illuminated in the air and gazed up at the two of us. A rare smile sprang from my face as I moved closer to the remarkable creation. Can you believe it? Never in my life have I seen something so young, so untainted and pure, I exclaimed as a pouring of joy filled me. Like most of the creatures on the island, the monster wasn't adorable by any means. Colossal specks poured from its face. A slim, limp noodle for a neck struggled to hold its laughably large head, and its patchy feathers failed to cover the thousands of thick veins that pulsed from its fresh skin. The black and clad abomination appeared to be a science experiment gone wrong, and yet, despite its repulsiveness, the beauty of the beast drawing its first breaths overtook me. I delicately petted the back of its head, careful not to harm its fragile frame. I was left awestruck as it stretched out its monstrous wings, gaunt and bony, just like its mother. Drops of hail cleaned off the bird's flesh. as its precarious waddle made it appear like it was dancing in the rain. The creature was splashing, cloaked and blinded, without a care in the world, without reality's cruel anchor tethering it to stagnation. Unequivocally pure. A sight I'd never forget. Gregory's hand then rested on my shoulder as I turned my head around and beamed at him. Breathtaking, I simpered, as my attention averted to the bird scuttling towards me. Gregory remained silent, while the bird's first song filled the air. Walter, I am so very sorry, said Gregory, as he plucked the newborn baby from the earth. Following a deep, desperate breath, taking one final weary look at the child, he heaved it off the cliff. Hapless squeals faded away as the bird disappeared into the ocean fog. You fucking asshole, I yelled as I pushed Gregory onto the floor. Really? Over a little chick? I thought you were better than that, barked Gregory as he warded off my ill-fated smacks and hits. And I thought you weren't a deranged psycho, I roared, inflamed by the ease in which my jabs were brushed aside. Gregory smirked and raised his hands in defeat. No, of course. I'm the psychotic one. I'm glad we established that. Now, will you please calm down so I can explain? He then rose from the ground and began his next lecture in his introduction to bullshit course, clamoring his morals and wisdom until his tedious lesson was cut short by a swooning sound in the air. Gregory's eyes then glanced over my shoulder and grew sullen as the sound crept closer. Suddenly, out from the fog, a miracle occurred. Despite all laws and logic, the bird did not fall. Instead, the creature emerged from the gray clouds, flapped its feathered wings, and flew gracefully back onto the mountain. My face fell frozen in astonishment as the creature plopped down next to my feet. My God, what a curious animal, exclaimed Gregory as he played with his beard, completely gobsmacked from ear to ear. In response, the bird waddled over to Gregory, pecked at his toes, and loudly chirped up towards his face. A small grin appeared over Gregory's mug as the bird crept back towards me and planted itself between my legs. Well, go ahead. Explain, I seethed. What a clever darling that thing is. Such a treat, said Gregory. He stood there perplexed by the creature. I started snapping my fingers at Gregory until he looked up at me. Go on. I'm waiting. Well, don't get mad. I made prompt assumptions that were probably careless, but I assumed you would understand my decision, he responded. A miffed, resentful look was the only thing I could offer for such a pointless excuse for an answer. Gregory surprisingly picked up on my displeasure and continued. You are interested in my assumptions, I see. Okay. Well, you don't seem to be the type of person to eat a newborn bird, are you? He continued after my eyes stubbornly rolled around my sockets. That's one correct assumption. And you don't seem like the person to be willing to sacrifice his life protecting a little squawking bird from an island populated by deadly predators. Are you? He looked down at the creature between my legs and back up at my petulant painted face. An incorrect assumption, I'm afraid. Now, Walter, let me educate you on the trials and tribulations of survival. They most definitely include not carrying around a day-old siren into the homes of murderous savages. Savages who will follow the screams of that little siren of yours until they meet its mother, which, believe it or not, is now you. So, instead of slamming its head against a rock, I did what seemed to be the most humane decision I could conjure. I aborted your little baby in the most pain-free way I could. To be honest, Walter, I did what I thought you couldn't, but wanted to do. You know what they say about assumptions, Gregory? Remind me, he commanded through his tried-and-true self-righteous smile. People who make assumptions are cunts who should keep their mouths shut, I barked, as I picked up the little monster and stomped off into the forest. I don't think that's quite the expression, Walter, replied Gregory, as he attempted to catch up. Our next journey began, and a familiar, harrowing thought again blazed in my eyes. I wanted food. Nevertheless, I couldn't waste time on wants. I needed answers. We trekked inland, traveling for what felt like miles until we were blanketed ourselves in shade, basking under a plethora of plush canopy trees. The island's only constant feature I seemed to enjoy, and yet even its offerings of dryness wasn't enough to thwart the black clouds swelling in my brain. Don't trust the doctor. Don't trust Gregory. Darwin's words echoing inside of me, perplexing me further with each repetition. Despite this, I couldn't confront Gregory and bludgeon him with questions. It would ravage him, and he wouldn't reveal a thing. Even if the monster's claims were true, by putting a spotlight atop a deceiver's deception, you only make it easier for them to deceive. No longer do they possess any conscience when survival is on the line. They'll simply lie, rendering the attack fruitless. Instead, one should pry it out of them, twist and mangle them into a maze they can't decipher, and make truth their only escape. For some reason, I trusted Darwin. For obvious reasons, I trusted Gregory. Despite all this, I didn't trust myself to choose the right person, left to stew in cognitive dissonance as our adventures continued through the labyrinth of lumber. We were met with skyscraper-like trees who housed thousands of ripe coconuts, their bark rusted and red, similar to scrapyard metal. With each passing moment, I felt like I was walking through my city streets, surrounded by buildings bedecked in holiday garb, ornaments hanging from their arches while they towered above. I was left yearning for food I'd never tasted and gutted by another entry into an endless marathon. As time rolled by, my legs shook and quivered. Despite this, my mind was cognizant of my lingering task. Every word my companion spoke was under careful analyzation. Each story he spewed was met with silence, as I searched for any holes, any inconsistency I could poke and prove as devilish intent. It was a foolish ideation, as the man preserved his angelic sheen, even comforting me as I hobbled. Look, I know it's hard, but we can't stop now. We're almost there. I can feel it. I can smell it in the air. Don't get too comfortable now. Remember keep your eyes alert, Walter. We don't know what's living here. Those pigs could be hiding around any corner, ready to pounce at any moment, he warned as his arms coiled around my shoulder. It was as if the man thought I had been knocked out since the day I arrived. Goldfish have the attention span to recall being attacked by a different predator every other second. I was no different. Greg seemed to think his groundbreaking thought was worth projecting, to stifle further projection. I affirmed his precaution. Yep, you're right. Thanks for the reminder, I clamored, doing my darndest to harness any slivers of sarcasm. In response, Greg smiled like a clown and pranced ahead of me, venturing deeper into the labyrinth. Now, look. Sometimes people need to release a commonly developed urge to speak. I understood that with Gregory, and picked up on his unfortunate habit. Here's the trick. Don't reinforce their behavior. Minimal verbal response them to death until they have nothing else to say, or better yet, end the conversation with a brisk affirmation. Don't fall into the really or why traps. Those are easy to use, but will only prolong the conversation even further. Low-hanging fruit is better left dangling on a branch. They're there because nobody in their right mind should eat them. Instead, stick it out. Embrace the silence and let time take its course. Counter-conditioning is ridiculously efficient and can be used on any living creature when done effectively. Do you want to know who it doesn't work on? Now look, Walter, I'm simply reminding you to keep your head on a swivel and crank your eardrums in case any new sounds appear in the air. Even the slightest snapping of a twig can signal an ambush, said Gregory, as he stood atop a stunted boulder. The man had somehow found the energy to climb every walking obstacle as entertainment, as he spent most of the time waiting for me to catch up, like a little kid high on a sugar rush, bouncing up and down in jitters. Do me a favor, and keep talking so that becomes a difficult task as possible. I fear you biting your tongue will make it too easy, I replied. Quite the opposite, believe it or not. In fact, wait. Are you doing that sarcastic shtick of yours? Don't you ever grow tired of it? Replied Gregory, in his unwavering, smug, satisfied tone. Nope, I gruffed. On and on we walked, trading barbs like sailors on the open waves. But instead of soaring through the seas, we were navigating through walls of fallen branches. By the looks of it, the forest seemed to have taken quite the damage from a recent storm. The once monstrous trunks were evaporating, each sliced in half by the island's monsoons, clean chunks ripped from the bark that depleted our once bulbous umbrellas. "We have to be going in circles," I exclaimed, as each new path was a carbon copy of the previous, spoiled by a rich multifarious of florid delights, and yet their flair is becoming stale, vaulting me into an unwavering loop, often only found within the dunes of a desert. Sadly, no mirage came my way, while the plucky bird planted itself above my shoulder. Pinchers for claws seeped into my skin, but was a pain that dissipated as my nerves grew numb. Alas, my body was giving up on our odyssey of absurdity, as my flesh accepted the discomfort. Hours sunk through us while we slithered forward, the sky transforming from a once silver sheen into a bulging blue, a change we greeted with triumphant applause until we came to realization the ramifications such a shift contained, namely, the sun. Rays shot through the emerald ceiling like laser beams, whizzing towards our flesh and baking our brains into depletion. Dehydration draining within us whilst our tongues writhed against the roofs of our mouths like sandpaper. The monotonous marathon had become dull. Then, without warning, our war of attrition had ended. A sudden sprout of energy sung inside the bird's spine as it leaped off my shoulder, zooming in the air and diving headfirst through the bushes in front of us. And just like that, he disappeared, soaring off myself and into the unknown, taking bits of my skin with it. I grunted in pain as Gregory rang with laughter. "Oh, these friends of yours keep disappearing, Walter. Should I be worried?" he hollered. "I think you're fine on that front," I replied in a hushed whisper, barely able to conjure a note while my tongue smacked in defiance. Cowardice traveling up my throat while I feared another round in the ring of debate. "Now, where did your little friend end up landing?" inquired Gregory, as he slashed a brush in front of us with his lumbering arms. "You likely grew bored with our journey by now, realizing a lost cause. For that I say good riddance. That little minx would have killed us with all his squawking and screaming. Just a complete and utter waste of space. For the sake of your longevity, you're lucky he left us, Walt," clamored Gregory, as he marched far and away from me, almost disappearing into the bray. "Luck," I repeated, stopping in my tracks while a migraine made its way across the fibers of my forebrain. I had forgotten the word's meaning. It had become foreign. I was left with distillation that was slowly ravaging me into a battered victim, swallowing myself within my own cognitions, a cloud of thoughts that drowned all the hope and sound around me. My gaze teetering along the gushing gashes that danced along my hands, the splintering scarlet skin that pulsed atop my veins, the ballooning black that encrusted the bridge of my nose, and the fleeting sight of darkness, which no longer brought me comfort, as each blink brought me closer to death. Again, strangled by a cloud, I continued to construct despite the consequences, perplexed by its simplicity and tearing away my perceived complexities. In that moment, I felt like nothing more than a glut of blood and bones, peppered in decrepit skin, no longer taking pride in my mind fading to ash, a mind overflowing with self-destruction, drenched in a daze that vacuumed from the air as Gregory yelped in excitement. The booming behemoth then torpedoed himself through the jungle's walls and left my sight with a laugh and skip. I'd been vaulted far and away from my tantrum of depression, and I couldn't have been more grateful. Flushed with intrigue, I hurried towards him and past the bloodstone barricade, even tripping into the ground in jubilation. I was awestruck, unable to seep the simper from my lips as my heart pattered through my skin. We finally found luck. Lying a mere 10 yards away from us was a pile, stacked several feet high, of freshly picked fruit, a hidden oasis of rich and decadent delights, and standing, perched on top of the mountain miracles, was my little baby bird, chuffed as ever and smiling from ear to ear. Pounds of oranges, grapefruits, mangoes, pineapples, and fruits I failed to identify towered before us, soaking in a smear of sunlight. It was as if we catapulted into heaven, trapped in tranquility while a wellspring brimming with life stood before us, its sight forever etched into my brain. It was a hidden, carved-out bowl stripped from the wasteland of trees and endlessly plucked groves. Not even the laws of logic could spring me from my trance. I knew damn well that stacks of fruit don't swell from the ground, and yet I didn't care. Like children waking up on Christmas Day, we sprinted to our gifts and unwrapped our presents. Tangy and sweet juice pumped through our veins as every bite sent shockwaves down my spine. Vials of sugar and desperately needed vitamins screamed through me and shot me into a drugged daze of euphoria. My eyes welled up with happiness as Gregory sat there, praying to the sky. I rose from the floor, my mouth gushing in sliced grapefruit, and admired the swooning sight of my bird. His beak plunged into the body of a giant orange as he pecked and swallowed his first meal. I couldn't help but giggle like a child as my mind emptied into blissfulness. What a glorious day. God is good to us. Well, whoever did this, I thank them for it. We deserved it, Walter. Heck, we deserve more than this. We really do, Greg. But in all honesty, I don't care. In this moment, I can't think of a more happy moment in my life, I stated. Corny drivel fell out of my mouth, but in that moment, the raw truth. Oh, Walter, there's the real guy. I'm getting there, aren't I? Exclaimed Gregory as he went in for a hug. I then begrudgingly took part in the most awkward embrace of my life and plopped to the floor. My head warmed to the touch of the sun rays peering out from the clouds while Gregory rose from the ground, rubbing his belly. The first moments of sunset were forming as the day was growing old. Sounds of cheerful chirps filled the air as dozens of fruits were pecked and plucked. The bird's once black beak was slathered with juice and decorated with strands of grapefruit that dangled from its head. It's a difficult construct to articulate, but I suddenly seeped into a sense of security. Something commonplace, and yet when it fell upon me, it couldn't have felt more unfamiliar, as if something was playing a trick on me. Safety had been a feeling I had never questioned back home, but on the island, well, that was a different story. Anxiety was my reality there. Everything else was a fleeting decor. I suppose the adage, you don't know what you got till it's gone, is fairly accurate, albeit contrived. Rather, your mind doesn't know what it's got till it's gone, is better suited for my situation, although the grammar usage is still repugnant. Regardless, sitting there for quite some time acted as a wonderful vaccine, splurging away the virus that was defiling my perceptions. I felt alone in my thoughts. Like a weight was hoisted off me and my head was finally clear, no longer tethered to another's sway. That is, until Gregory's blathering of ill-fated dialect slaughtered through my self-scheme of serenity, awaking me from my dream. Walter, I've something to show you, exclaimed Gregory from afar, his words muffled by his incessant chompings of food. As I sprang up from the ground, a whirl of nausea leaped through me. In response, I released an anxious moan and waddled over to my companion. Ate more than your fair share, did you? Didn't your mom ever tell you that too much of a good thing could be bad? Bellowed Gregory over the swirls of howling wind. A ridiculous statement. It never made sense to me. Excess is always the goal, Greg. That's why I'm such a nice person. I laughed at my own joke like an idiot, and after making my way around the tower of fruit, abruptly stopped in astonishment. Gregory was on the floor, kneeling but a few yards away from the entrance of a deep and gaunt tunnel. My eyes widened and gleamed at the decrepit hole that seemed to stretch miles without end, a dark window into a mystifying void. Surrounding the mouth's entrance was a celestial moat, full of freshly caught rainwater. A bulb in my brain flickered in hopes I'd gargle down a generous gulp, but before I had the chance, Gregory approached the pool, cupped his hands in the drink, and slurped. It's safe if you're thirsty. Just try not to look too deep down when you try some, he warned. Anxiously, I walked over to Gregory, my eyes and ears perked with curiosity. In truth, thirst was something I often neglected, as the need for food swelled after each day. Now, equipped with a full stomach, I was more than willing to indulge myself. Alas, I wasn't alone, as my flying friend joined me in our conquest. Not even the seeding claws of the bird could thwart my delight as they dug into my shoulder blade, emaciation amplifying every centimeter of its talons. It was a pain that faded as my vision fell frozen
upon the sight of bones resting in the trenches of the moat's floor. "Walter, you're thirsty. You have to drink it," said Gregory, his voice unusually perturbed and soft. "They follow me everywhere I go. These bones, these poor, wretched bones. I've seen them before. I'm sure of it." "Gregory, we have to leave," I stammered, falling pale and alert, while the man looked on at me and frowned. "I agree, but before we do, you must drink. I don't know where the next source of fresh water is, and this isn't the time to play the odds. Without water in your system, you'll grow even madder. You'll fall deeper into the depths of your own." I gulped down as much water as my stomach could hold, as it was the only way to staple Gregor's mouth shut for a few seconds. He wasn't listening to me after all, and I needed him to focus. Liquid lurched down my throat like needles against pavement and pounded against the bowels of my stomach. I spit from my tongue as a scent of rot tattooed my taste buds. Then, from the corner of my eye, I spotted something else floating in the depths of my drink. A bloodied, severed arm. "I was hoping you wouldn't see that," said Gregory as he rubbed his fingers against the lids of his eyes. My stomach welled in disgust as the thought of Darwin flashed in my eyes. Disgust that rapidly grew until the source purged itself from my body. Vomit then covered the once still pool and bubbled over the sight of the horror beneath. "Well, we won't be drinking any more of that. Time to leave, yes?" chuckled Gregory as he dipped his hand back in the water and wiped dirt clean off his forehead. "You're fucking disgusting," I exclaimed as I yacked the last remains of our feast out from my throat. "Hyperbolic as always, Walter. Your flair for the dramatic never gets old. Now, like I said, it's time to leave." As if on cue, just as we were about to turn to exit, my little siren screeched. Its wings flapped and snapped against my ears until I tugged at its feet. I held them tightly together until its incessant flapping stopped. In response, the squeals grew louder and louder. I looked over at Gregory, whose eyes fixated behind me, as his face fell solemn and white. My neck craned backward until I was faced with my next predator. The next demon to grace my eyes, yet another story I knew I'd hate to tell. A tale that would leave my lips like a bare-faced lie, and yet it was the truth. Another monster who was, to my dismay, not alone. Standing side by side, quiet and still, were two gigantic and grim reptiles. Scaled green like the moss that grew from the floor and hauntingly heavy, stood two mutant creatures planted wide on all fours. They were stretched out long, similar to a crocodile, but much heavier, containing cracked and horn shells. Their eyes were large and golden, with sharp slits for pupils that never seemed to blink. Both their mouths gaped ajar, revealing a wicked set of skewers for teeth. There was nothing we could have done, just left in disarray, flummoxed and petrified, not wanting to agitate them, not wanting to die. Gregory's eyes flickered and swirled, looking for any sign of an escape, but fell hopeless, as no exit was in sight. The rest of his body remained locked in cement as he whispered, "Stay still," under his breath. Advice I accepted, and the advice the monsters refused to take. Gradually, they both begun their bone-chilling saunters towards us. Gregory's breath quickened as the beats of my heart sounded as if they were hooked up to a speaker. Closer and closer they crept, until their faces were only a few feet away. Horror cooked inside of me, as the sight of their boiled and cracked scales glistened in the sunlight. I wanted to run. I truly did, but my legs grew heavy in the weight of fear. I yearned and prayed for Gregory to sprint past them, but was left to dwell in disappointment as he stood, frozen in torment. One's lifeless eyes flickered in excitement as the two giants closed in, their mouths draped open, stretching for miles while they sunk towards us. Before their jaws could charge through our limbs, my bird bolted off my back and sailed into the darkness of the cave. Not a second later, Gregory ripped at my arm as we dove into the bog behind us.
We paddled and kicked through the dead and empty water until we climbed up onto the entrance floor. The ground gulped us in grime as we drained into the earth like quicksand, satanic sludge thundering from our feet up to our kneecaps, rendering us nearly immobile. It was underway. We did not hear violent splashing or the hammering of footsteps, and instead the Jurassic pair continued their lethargic lunges closer to their meals, toying with us while our blood boiled and bodies fumed in sweat. They were like two master chefs crafting their cuisines, their devilish patience acting as the perfect seasoning. I watched in horror as they dripped their plump legs into the moat and disappeared into its depths. A splintering smack hit the back of my head as Gregory screamed, "Run now!" into my face. I followed as we sprinted into the tunnel and transported into a desert of darkness. Nothing was in sight, and we couldn't go back. We were trapped. Both of us knew it, and both of us felt it. Stalked by a foul stench that coated the air, my nostrils were greeted by a thick stench, eliminating one of my last remaining senses. Our attempts to sprint were thwarted by the ever-sinking battlefield, causing us to fall and tumble into its claws, constantly shifting from the bare rock to the thick grass drenched in a soggy mist. The crowns of our heads bludgeoning themselves against saps of spider silk. Missing out on that pretty sight was probably a blessing in disguise. In essence, it was like we were being tormented atop a treadmill. We couldn't stop moving, because if we did, our legs would lock and sink into the frothy muck. So naturally, we ran. My legs blossomed, and 100 pounds heavier as my shoes brimmed with sludge. Stripped of my sensations, with only Gregory's breath left to hear, I was forced to follow his voice, in tremors, blind as ever. It was an endeavor that only lasted for what was only a handful of minutes, and yet the minutes felt like a lifetime. Our bird soared ahead, silent in the sky, the only reminder of its existence being the brush of air its feathers puffed through the tufts of my hair. A heartwarming sliver of joy within our cascade of agony. To keep pace, I sawed my shoulders against the narrowing edges of the cave, a damaging affair, but through Gregory's guidance our venture was seamless. Maintaining our speed was difficult, but paramount, as the hissing of the two monsters behind us echoed throughout the dungeon. Haunting reminders of what followed several yards behind, but also a helpful encouragement to keep sprinting. And sprint we did, for it felt like a mile. Not a long journey by any means, but when lathered in conglomerated goo, a mile can seem like a century, especially when following Gregory, who took his dear time maneuvering through the labyrinth, so purposely considering each turn as if he'd ventured through it before. Luckily, my hand draped across his back as he acted as a pseudo-GPS, whispering for me to turn left or right at the most opportune of moments. Like most guidance systems, Gregory bottomed out, growing silent and leaving my grasp, rendering me a blinded fool while the two trucks reared from behind, ready to flatten me into my grave while I trudged forward, grasping in the air for any tangible form of solace. Instead, I was greeted with a sound as I heard a sharp plop of splashing thunder in front of me. Then, after one last shameful step, my legs fell weightless, as I plummeted into a black abyss. Swallowed by sludge, I kicked and flailed my legs, trying to reach the surface. My entire body tangled in what felt like a thick web of seaweed. I hastily ripped them off my flesh and gulped for air, swallowing a mouthful of liquid sewage. With a snap of a finger, I'd been vaulted into orbit. My lungs left to panic, and my nose ballooned with water. Panic erupted within me while the weeds coiled around my neck like cobras. In an earnest attempt for salvation, I stretched my arm out wide until Gregory's monstrous hand ripped me to the surface. I emerged a broken man, yakking and coughing black bile from my throat as my eyes watered in pain. Then I felt a quick pinch as Gregory tugged at my ear. The man nearly ripped the lobe from my flesh while I wailed, "Don't stop! They're coming! They're almost here!" he barked. I could see Gregory's face colored in fear as a light shined through the ceiling of the tunnel, a window that transfixed the man as his eyes darted in thought. Then in an instant his fear turned to joy as the light bulb in his head struck. What Gregory was planning was running through me as well. We had a chance to leap through the gateway and into the arms of the forest,
Hope ran through me as we rushed towards the light. Rampant hissing drummed around us as we rose from the water. "You first," commanded Gregory, as he heaved me onto his shoulders. I became enamored by the sight above, utterly consumed by the sky, which was glowing sunbeams onto my face. They seemed heavenly. From the rim of the gaping hole I spotted 2 small claws of feet that belonged to my bird, as his face peered down from the exit and chirped towards us to come up. Our escape began as I stood high on Gregory's massive shoulders and attempted to grab at the rocks dangling below the brim. Each pull was futile, as my hands slipped with every grasp, my exit still drenched from the morning's bath. "You know what I have to do, right?" I blurted, my face withdrawing inside of me while the thought rang. "Jump, Walter, jump or die. There is no choice," said Gregory, knowing my fate was clear. Just as I was readying my legs, a cognition shot through my brain. "Wait, how are you going to get up here?" I asked. To solve this quandary, ideas sprung in my brain, up and down but getting nowhere. In response, Gregory relieved a deep exhale and gently shook my ankles. "Oh, Walter, we don't have any time to wait. You're a wonderful man. Please, just jump. Jump and end this for the both of us," replied Gregory in a relaxed, tranquil voice. No. Put me down. We'll find another way. I can't just leave you. You can't stop moving, Walter. I've told you this countless times. The longer you wait, the worse it'll be. For the both of us. I'll be just fine. Please, Walter. Jump. I don't want to ask again," he interrupted. Departing Gregory had felt perversely unnatural, so much so that it felt as though I was about to soar out from my own skin. The two of us had been intertwined for so long to the point where we became etched together. A subtle symbiosis that kept both of us sane and kept both of us from isolation. It was impossible to leave a man who was becoming a part of what made me, and yet I had to. Rife with guilt, my legs bent and readied for my retreat. With another forceful push from Gregory, I zoomed into the sky and hooked my hand atop the lip of the hole. My left arm lashed onto one of the bulging stones that sprung through the skin of the gravestone, and with it, I could inch closer to safety. A smile slapped onto my face as I lifted myself out of death and towards the embrace of life. Abruptly, the stone jolted from the earth, and I plunged down, slamming the back of my head against the rock floor. I woke up to a frenzy of stinging pecks against my forehead and opened my eyes to reality's mask, left to bask in the glow of 2 eyes, gushing oranges that peered down at me and reflected the side of my face. A face I was having trouble recognizing. My bird was on top of me, screeching at the top of its lungs. I lifted my neck and spotted Gregory looking off in the distance past me. In his hands was a long, thin stick, oozing with mud. Greg, why are you... Why? I slurred as I stroked the back of my head, discovering a golf ball-sized welt. I followed his eyes and deliberately turned my head around, my bird fluttering off my chest and onto Gregory's shoulder, squawking at the 2 towers standing beside us. There they were, the 2 shelled monstrosities, frozen. One locked eyes with me and immediately crept forward. My heart plummeted down my stomach as its mouth snapped open. "Gregory," I blurted as I attempted to back up. I cemented myself into the bog, deprived of movement or rational thought, trapped as my mind emptied and erupted within itself. Rays beamed off the monster's leathery face, baking the dirt on its flesh. Its mouth was agape, sending a cloud of horrid breath through my face. Then, believe it or not, luck prevailed. Slicing through the air and past my head was Gregory's spear. It shot down the monster's mouth and lodged itself into the barrel of its jugular. In horror, the beast shook and thrashed its neck from side to side, hopelessly trying to lodge it out. Empty gasps for air sang through its flurry of movement. Before the smattering of blood had the chance to dissipate, something magical happened. As the monster's neck lashed from side to side, the spear slashed through the animal's flesh. and seared through the skin. Violent grunts bellowed in the cave elegantly, like blissful music in my ears. Out from the abomination sprang a sizzling slurpee of scarlet, screaming from its skin and onto mine, the warm touch of guts echoing a scarf across my face. I couldn't be any happier. Through the fog of psychopathic paradise, Gregory pulled me upwards and dragged me out from the mud. As the sight of the desperate predator flailed on the floor, whipping against his companion, he looked as if he was self-destructing, leaving this world with an emphatic final song, one that rang in my ears while the cave quivered along with its haunting ballad. "Thanks," I murmured as we both tiptoed away from the beasts and back into darkness. Gregory brought his face close to mine, stabbing me in the eye with his long hooked nose. "Oh, please, you never have to thank me for something like that. Just remember, there won't always be someone there to save you, Walter. You must know this. Soon it's going to be your turn." I lightly pushed his face away from mine and exhaled. "Yeah, I'm well aware." We continued our trek through the tunnel, filling around the frigid and granitic tube for any exit. Traveling through the labyrinth of turns and climbs grew tiresome, as the ceiling wavered from thousands of feet high to so low that we had to crawl on our stomachs like worms swimming in rain. An ever-shifting marathon that added another hour to our journey, one spent in darkness, as the sun faded from the sky, replaced by a pounding drum of rain. It was a surprise that shocked neither of us. Over time, my pores were encrusted with a thick coat of grime that cracked with any movement in my face. The smell eventually subsided as my nostrils clogged with the swamp soil. I waited for quite a bit of time, but grew baffled as Gregory never made a comment. Not one complaint. Not a single quarrel. A pattern Gregory held since the day I met him, but something I desperately hoped he would break. Complaining isn't fun when you're the only one doing it. It just makes you weak. Gregory was beyond strong. He was an absolute rock. I was not. I was more like a scissor that preferred to cut off all he met. I preferred appearing as if I didn't like them, when in truth it's because I don't want to grow attached to them. For if they left while the attachment still lingered, then they'd take my flesh with it. They'd destroy me. And as the adage goes, rock beats scissors. As a result, my complaints festered and withered away in my gloomy brain, itching to escape. Alas, they no longer did. I'd become conditioned. My complaints failed to flee my lips, as time passed, neglected to even form in my matter. That thought often made me feel grateful. But there's a time and place for composure, and this was not one of them. "Do you feel it, Walter?" exclaimed Gregory, as a sudden haste fell out of him. "Do I feel what?" I responded, worried that his answer would come attached to consequences. "It," he emphasized. "The annoyance of somebody playing the pronoun game? Yeah, it's boiling inside of me," I teased. He slapped at my arm and placed his hand over my mouth, shushing me into silence. Drips of vile sludge trickled down my lips as I spat into Gregory's face. "Charming, as always. Seriously, though, stop talking. Close your eyes and tell me if you feel anything." I obliged and let my senses run wild. Turns out, he wasn't lying. I felt it. Gregory wasn't spouting nonsense. Wind was softly kissing my face as a smile fired across my mad mug. "You brilliant bastard, of course I feel it. Let's get out of here," I cheered. Gregory cackled in laughter. "I'm glad I'm not turning insane in here. I felt it for quite some time. I just thought it was a hallucination. I was quite embarrassed, to tell you the truth." "Gregory Enola, embarrassed? Unfortunately, my friend, your mind may be slipping. Maybe we should remedy that." The two of us took off with fleeting excitement, tripping and bumping against the terrain while wind called our names. There were obstacles we ignored, as our goal was in reach, and a faint light was in sight. The alluring glow grew as white flashes flickered in front of us. Thunderous booms thumped through the tunnel, shaking the floor we walked. A rainstorm awaited us outside the maze, a familiar foe that transformed into a welcome friend compared to the devilish snare toying with our limbs. No longer were the days of quicksand-like mud, as a hurricane was ready to embrace us with open arms. Like a lamp being flicked on and off, the aid of lightning bolts was not a reliable companion in the cloak of darkness. It was, however, the only companion the three of us had left, and we embraced it with smiles, the bird flinching with every crack. Our slog of a journey ended at the feet of a steep cliff, one that led to an empty pool of black water. From below, light lunged through two separate tunnel exits. One shined brightly, while the other was muffled in gray. In delight to our discovery, our bird sang in the air, as we realized our destination was but a few dozen feet away. All we had to do was jump. I walked over to the edge of the cliff and bent down, elated to make my escape, breathing in the daunting drop and letting its scale swoon in my stomach. Then a quick tug on my shirt drove me backward and onto the floor. "Wait," whispered Gregory, as he knelt down on the ground and picked up the remnants of a cracked boulder off the floor. With both hands he crept towards the edge, heaved it over his shoulders, and tossed it dozens of feet down into the water. A flurry of movement rushed towards the splash, and a choir of haunting hisses rang through the air. Hundreds of our stalking reptiles emerged from the den they resided in, emaciated and malnourished unlike our would-be predators. They thrashed in the air, snapping their mouths open and closed at the water flying in the air. Gregory stared right at me, with an empty expression on his face. "Walter, we have to jump." "I know," I interrupted, as I seamed my fingers through my hair in anguish, realizing the absurdity of what we were about to attempt, acknowledging how we'd faced and danced with death before, and while we walked away from those draining waltzes with our body and minds in tow, not every dance would end the same. At some point, we'd have to pay our bill. "When I signal, jump as close to the exit as you can," he commanded. I nodded and attempted to control my breathing, unable to simmer the stress ventilating through me, pounding along with the thunder in the air. I waited as Gregory picked up another piece off the boulder and lifted it over his head. "Ready? Go!" Gregory launched the rock down into the water with all his might, as far away from the exit as he could. Without hesitation, a fuel burned in me as I leaped off the platform and into the venomous pit. A tragic hero, ready to meet his tragic end. I rose from the water and grasped for air as the monstrous cries seared in my eardrums. Feverishly trembling, I stroked the water with my fleeting remains of strength, kicking at the liquid waste in dire hope to reach the exits, feeling as if I was shrunk and plunged into the tank of lobsters, left to wiggle myself from their claws. I lifted my head from the waist to witness a blinding crack of lightning that illuminated the entire den like wildfire. It was a floating graveyard, a tomb that housed decrepit corpses that bobbed like rotten apples in a black punch. Those who were not skeletonic carcasses were knocking on the door of their dearly departed, as every one of them seemed deathly ill. Unable to gaze upon their nightmarish glory any further, I heaved myself into the swamp floor and toward the tunnel's fork. Not 2 steps passed before the sight of Gregory flashed in my eyes. I whipped my head backward to see where the poor man was, hoping he was a second behind. He, too, was swimming close to the shore, but followed by a close trail of rabid demons. Swooping through the air, my bird flew and clamped onto my shoulder. Over the sounds of irate screams of the sickly creatures and roars of rain from outside, the bird squawked and called for Gregory as he paddled towards us. His arms were smacking through the water at an Olympic pace, but it was not enough, as the monsters came closing in. Torment burned through me as Gregory stopped and closed his eyes. Prayers whispered under his breath as hope dwindled. He was accepting death, but I couldn't allow it. I needed him. Losing him was worse than losing myself. I didn't want to be alone again. I couldn't crawl back into my sinking void. Overwhelmed in horror, I did the only thing I can do. With a twist in my hands, I cracked the neck of my bird and tossed him far and long away from Gregory and into the mob of animals. They all swirled towards the back of the pit like ravenous wolves, fighting over the flesh of the newborn baby. Blood flew in the air as the animals fought each other tooth and nail over every bite, gnawing and slashing at each other's faces until they drowned each other in the water's grasp. Gregory's eyes opened as he swam towards me and followed towards the exit. I ripped him out of the water with a strength I never knew existed, my muscles trembling in an anxious rush. While I try to suppress it, the image of the beast ripping the feathers and bones off my companion's body remains scarred in my memory. An innocent and young creature did not deserve such a fate. But the time to mourn was put on hold as we mulled over the two paths before us, one with white bolts and flashes of light brimming from the doorway, the other dark and desolate, as if the gates led to the grim afterlife. In the end, I chose light. We sprinted deeper into the tunnel until we dove through a large opening in the exit, one that led into a hellhole I now called home, the jungle. Plops and buckets of rain fell into our faces as we lied on the ground, depleted and exhausted. Earth washed from my face as lightning cracked in the air like fireworks. We crawled under the cover of low-hanging canopy trees and nestled ourselves downward and out of sight. Eyes followed as the decrepit creatures peered out from the tunnel exit, growing closer, revealing their skeleton-thin faces. Wiry and frail, hauntingly still with blood smeared across their faces, the demons stood with claw marks up and down their necks, desperate to add to the remains of the infant bird that lied in their shrunken stomachs. Despite their efforts, none of them saw us, as if they were all blinded by the mere ounces of light in the sky. Nevertheless, they waited, rushing back and forth at the entrance, grazing the area for another taste to ease their pains. A few mustered the courage to venture beyond the cave, but were promptly stomped by the spurts of lightning in the air. Each snap in the sky made them wince in fear. Ultimately, their bravery waned, and their thirst followed suit. Swollen with defeat, the horde slithered back into their hole, bounded by time, forced to wait for the next hapless victim that comes stumbling into the depths of their pool. Shaken, Gregory was silent, with a somber look colored on his face. My eyes welled with dread, as my protective shield had cracked. There comes a point in life when you can't mask your feelings. I couldn't lie to myself and Gregory any more. I was horrified. Putting on an empty face or a fake smile, it couldn't help me anymore. I had to kill a friend, but I did my duty. And I would do it over again, and again, and again, and again.